Hi everyone, Shane Fleming here. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about residential valuations and the methods to value property. So recently enough I set up a group on Slack for people who are interested in property investment or also interested in getting involved in the property market from working it or investing in it. So I set that group up on Slack a few weeks ago, and the other day I put out some ideas I might do some videos on. One of the ideas that came back was residential valuations and how I go about that, or how you should go about residential valuations. So I put together a slideshow on that, which I'll go through now. But realistically, what I'm kind of doing is just the fundamentals of valuing residential property and what's important to look out for when you're valuing residential property. So I'll hop onto the slideshow now and I'll go through that quickly. So in terms of residential valuations, it's important to kind of understand what's actually involved in valuing a property. So there are a number of different methods that are adopted by valuers and the market to value property. The methods that are used, there's mainly kind of 4 or 5 main key methods that are used within property. The first is comparable evidence, which I'll go through in a lot of detail within this slideshow. The other one is market valuations based on investment yields, and it's kind of understanding what yields the properties are generating within the market. I'll go through that a little bit. Discounted cash flow, this is done from an investment point of view and understanding the profit. Residual valuations, generally speaking, that is understanding the cost of a development or cost of a property and trying to work out what profit you can make out of it. It's more in line with valuing sites. And then there's the contractor's method as well. Again, there's a few different names of this and a few different areas that it's used in. Mainly speaking, it's used in valuing properties that don't actually have a commercial use, along the lines of a hospital or along the lines of a power plant or something like that. It's more about how much it actually costs to replace it. But generally speaking, what I'll focus on today, because I'm focusing on residential valuation methods, is the comparison method, and I'll touch a little bit on the investment side of things as well. So in terms of the comparison method, this is generally the most common method used in residential property. It does have its strengths and it has its weaknesses. It's also sometimes called the comparable method. So the comparison and comparable method basically are the same thing, but what you're doing is you're comparing one property against a number of similar properties that have sold in the area or on the same street to determine the market value of the subject property you're trying to value. So in terms of the actual task that's involved for a valuer, or when you're actually valuing a property if you're using the comparison method, the first thing you need to do is go in and inspect the property that you're valuing. You need to measure it up. You need to check the conditions of the property, including any external area in terms of front garden, back garden, is it on a site, etc. And also what you'll need to do is you'll need to source information on recently sold properties within the area that are similar to the subject property, so they have similar characteristics of the property you're valuing. So you'll need to find properties that have sold that are similar to the subject property within the area. And then effectively what a good valuer's job is to actually then adjust the value that they're applying to the subject property using their experience and knowledge and know-how. So when you're looking at the comparison method, what you need to look out for. So a valuer will need to make adjustments and use their experience to understand the impact a difference in properties will actually have on the market value of the subject property. There's a whole range of things you need to look out for when you're a valuer. You need to make sure you're comparing properties of a similar size, similar number of bedrooms. You also need to make sure that they are the same condition. You don't want to be comparing one property that has been recently refurbed versus one that needs a huge amount of work. And if you are comparing ones that need work to ones that have been recently refurbed. You have to allow for the construction costs that's involved to actually refurb a property when you are comparing properties. You also have to think about the number of bathrooms, the size of those bathrooms. You also need to think about the size of the garden, car parking. Car parking will have a big impact on the value of a property in terms of, is it on street, off street, is it private car parking, or is there no car parking? You'll have to, when you're looking at apartments as well, you should consider the service charge elements of it. Are the service charge elements low or high, or is there some major issues that could impact the service charge that could be payable on a property, because that would have a major impact on the actual value of the property in case there's any defects with a property, which could impact on the service charge. Property tax here in Ireland is not a big thing, but if you're looking at it from other countries, property tax can actually have a major impact on the value. Sometimes, depending on the area, the street, the property tax could be far higher and have an impact on the property value, because ultimately your costs are going to be higher. However, sometimes it can have a positive value on the property because people will see it as an area that's going to be maintained. The development potential, I know we're talking about residential stuff here, but the development potential of property could actually have a huge impact on the value as well. So you need to think about the garden sizes. Is it a corner site which has the ability to extend or sell off a plot of land, or can you extend it to back garden? So you need to think about the potential that it has to that you have to upgrade the property. Energy ratings, this is kind of here in Ireland, this is your BER. They don't have a huge impact on values at the moment, but I suppose it is something that's becoming more and more relevant, and people are becoming more and more concerned about when they are looking to buy property, what the BER is. So it is slowly having an impact on the value of a property. So when you're comparing one property to another, it is important to know that if one was very highly energy efficient versus one that's not. The orientation of a property, this is something that is a crucial element when valuing a property, because how a residential property gets its sun. Is it south facing, north facing? And when you're comparing comparable evidence, you need to understand what you're comparing. Also, you need to understand what's going on adjoining the property. Sometimes some uses could have a major impact on one property versus another. Are you going to be located beside a school? That can have a positive or a negative impact. If you're right beside the school, you could have to deal with morning traffic in the morning and in the afternoon. That could have a negative impact on the actual value of the property, whereas if you were 2 streets further away from the school, you have the benefit of actually being close to the school but not having the upset of actually all the things that go along with being right beside a school. Also, you need to think about stuff like floodplains. Sometimes one property could be literally 500 meters down the road, and it could be in a floodplain on a map that basically insurers will not insure the property. So all of these little things can have a massive impact when you're comparing comparables. So you have to understand all these small little things that actually could impact the property. Also, when you're looking at a property, you need to be comparing like with like as much as possible. So the age of the property, the structure, is it a pitched roof or a flat roof? If it is a flat roof, then will there be any issues with getting insurance and so on? So when you're looking at the comparable method and its strengths, so it is a good method for residential property, probably one of the best methods for residential property. A large volume of recent comparable sales will give a very good guide on the market value for a subject property. It's straightforward for a valuation method. There's a lack of calculations, so it reduces any errors that might actually occur, and it is the most common method used between residential agents, and therefore it's a well-established method, so it leads to less confusion between agents as well. The comparison method does have its weaknesses, and a valuer needs to understand that the comparison method does have limitations. The lack of detail of comparable evidence can impact the valuer's ability. So therefore, if the valuer doesn't have direct knowledge of a certain property or certain properties in the area that have sold recently, they're reliant on information from other agents or from databases that they may have access to. And those databases or agents may not supply them with the full details, i.e. they may not know the exact condition of the property that they're using as a comparable, or they may not know the exact orientation of the property as well. So this can lead to some issues and some discrepancies in valuations. Also, in areas where there's a very low volume of transactions, the comparison method doesn't really stack up, and what agents will have to do, or valuers will have to do, is they'll have to look at similar towns in the area rather than the town that they're actually trying to look at. They may have to go further afield, and that can lead to discrepancies as well. Also, it's not a very good method to be using for commercial property, because basically most commercial properties are valued on the rents that they're achieving and also the leases that they have in place. So you could have two buildings that look identical side by side, but there could be a 50% difference in the valuation purely based on the actual lease that's in place. So it's not a good method for commercial property. Comparable sales may not correctly illustrate the level of demand that's in the current market. So when you're looking at comparable sales, they could actually be six months out of date, and even when you're looking at some of the databases that come in for sales that actually have completed, they can even be further out of date, because it can take 5 months or so for the legal process to get through. So you need to be careful when you're looking at comparables that they're not too far out of date. Even though they may seem very recent, they could be very out of date. And I think this is kind of something that I would find a concern with the comparison method, is that it doesn't give the valuer the ability to easily change their opinion on value based on changes within the market. So in terms of Ireland and the comparison method in regards to where you source your data for comparisons, so basically most valuers will rely on their own databases for their first protocol. Next will be other agents that have sold properties nearby. Then you also have the property price register. Some people feel that this is kind of, the property price register is something that can't be trusted, but realistically there are prices that are being put up by solicitors, and the solicitors have to put up the prices that are included in the sales contract. So I think they can be reasonably well trusted. If there is a discrepancy in the price, there could be some difference between a little bit because of contents not being included in the contract sale, and where there's a real difference where it hasn't sold for market value or market value, the solicitor is meant to put a little asterisk on it to say that this wasn't a market sale. So other sources will be the likes of your My Home and Daft here in Ireland. There's obviously further afield in other cities. They have different portals. Some of those portals provide amazing tools for valuers. In America, they have amazing tools with maps and so on that they can actually it will actually automatically give you a value on a property. Same will be said with databases we have here in Ireland. Property Week haven't used in a long time, but we also have a new enough database that agents have use of, which is the IPPI. It pretty much gives you a snapshot of the value of a property once you put in a limited amount of data in terms of address and size of the property and number of bedrooms. It will be able to give you a rough average price that the property might sell for. And I think a lot of agents are starting to use this. It's a great tool. It's a very good, they're good tools all around to give you a quick snapshot of what the market value might be. But I think it's important that agents and the public know that these aren't actually valuations. They're realistically, all they are is market snapshot, and it's really up to the valuer to use their own guides to and knowledge to actually put a proper value on it. These kind of reports wouldn't stack up in a court of law, or they wouldn't stack up for tax purposes, so they're not really valuations, but they're definitely a great tool for valuers. The investment method is the next one I'm going to touch on for residential property. It's not actually commonly used that much within the residential market, but I think it is something that probably people watching this video might be interested in, and also people who are on the Slack group might be interested in as well. So I'm going to touch a little bit on this, but I can go into more detail in later videos, but this is just a quick snapshot. So the investment method for residential property can be used by investors when comparables are not really widely available, and when they're looking at it from a cash flow point of view. So the investment method is really better suited for the commercial market and multi-unit residential properties, but some residential investors will use this method to guide them in their bids for smaller residential properties. The investment method, I suppose the task really here is to first, you need to understand what yields are, and you need to understand what the yields are for the market that you're actually investing in. So the percentage yield basically represents the annual rent compared to the property price. So this is a very simple example that I'm going to give here now within the slide. But basically, say if you were to say your average gross yield for a particular market was 7.4%, and your average yield for that type of property, 2-bed property or whatever it was 24,000. So basically, you will divide 100 by 7.45 and multiply it by the annual rent, which will give you an approximate property value of 325,000. That's just a quick example of what an average gross yield would be. Okay, that can change drastically the property price if the rent goes up or down, or if you shift the yield slightly in 1% or 2. That will have a massive impact on the actual value of the property. So it's important to understand yields. I probably will do a separate video and separate slideshow completely on yields, because it is a kind of it can get way more technical than just a gross yield. But many agents will publish yields, the average investment yields for the likes of the office market, the retail market, and they'll also do multi-unit families, but they generally won't publish the average yields for standalone properties. So therefore, anyone who's looking at it from an investment point of view will have to come up with their own average yields. So when you're looking at the investment method and how to find the market yields, investors will basically have to look at a particular market they are looking at and understand and know how much properties are selling for, and understand how much they're renting for as well. So in this slide, I've given a quick example of just take 3 residential properties, what they sold for and what they'll rent for, and you can see that they will all give slightly different yields. But basically what you need to do is build up a huge database of these kind of properties within a particular area to build up what your average gross yield will be. The more examples you have, the more accurate your market yield will be. So the valuer's job is to kind of understand what factors will affect the yield and how they can apply the correct yield to a subject property. And I think that's what's kind of important to understand, that a slight change in a yield will have a massive impact on actually the value of a property. And it's important to also understand that different areas will have different yields, and some yields may attract different types of investors, and other yields, higher yields, might attract a totally different type of investor. So this is where it gets kind of complicated from an investment point of view when you're looking at it from a residential perspective. The investment method does have its strengths. It's mainly used for commercial property, as I said, and it can be used in the residential side, but when it is used in the residential side, it's generally used for multi-family units. So they're big apartment blocks and stuff like that it's used for. A good valuer can adapt a yield that they're applying to a property up or down for when the market changes. So if there is a change in interest rates, a good valuer will know how that will impact the yield quickly and be able to change the value very quickly of a property. So that allows a valuer to be able to give far better, more accurate, up-to-date valuations of properties, where the comparable method definitely can have an issue of being a lagging effect, because comparisons are based on sold properties and they could be 6 months ago. So therefore, the investment method and using yields you can adapt your yields based on actually any changes within the market. The methods actually can be made and expanded to be far more complex, which give far more accurate valuations. What I've just explained in the last slide was realistically just a very simple example of a gross yield, but you can get into net yields, you can get into equivalent yields, and all sorts of different kind of methods to value property. So it can become a far more accurate tool for establishing what your net cash flow will be as well. So when actually looking at the weaknesses for the investment method when it comes to residential property, the valuer needs to understand that there is limitations within using the investment market when you're looking at it from a residential point of view. And I think the first thing that kind of comes to mind is something I learned when I was in first year college, when I was asked to write a horrible paper about the difference between worth and value, and it's kind of stuck with me ever since. But basically, this is where I think the investment method falls down for when you're looking at residential property. So when you're looking at a yield based valuation, it works really well for commercial property, but for residential property, there's a level of worth that comes into it for some buyers. So what I mean by that basically is that a property worth to an investor is how much they can actually take out of it from a cash flow point of view, and that's not the same as the same worth that a homeowner would apply. So basically what I mean by that is a homeowner can apply a huge amount of worth to a property, such as a shelter, it has memories, there's future hope for kids there, you might really like your neighbours, you could have gone to school in the area and you want your kids to go to school in the area, etc. So there's loads of things there that homeowners and occupiers can put a huge amount of worth on a property that doesn't actually translate into a value. So therefore, when you compare an investment method to residential property, the investment method cannot calculate what individuals or what people might put in terms of worth on a residential property. So that's where it really falls down, because you might have some people who are willing to pay way more than the investment value purely because it's where they grew up and it's where they want to stay living. So I hope you enjoyed that, or maybe not enjoyed it, but I hope you got some use or some benefits out of it. And I'm if you have any questions on it, put your comments below. As I said, there is a Slack group there as well, which if you want to get involved in, if you're based here in Ireland, please DM me on Instagram or put a comment below and reach out to me on email. I'll put my email address below, and on that Slack group I will answer some kind of more detailed questions if some people have particular questions in regards to how some of these methods are applied. Also, feel free to put your comments below as well if you have a question too, and make sure you subscribe. Until next time.